What's up guys? Welcome to AnimeKouhai, an extension of Anime Senpai PH channel. All pieces of information are derived from the light novel. In today's video, we will start volume 8 of the light novel. This video is the prologue's first part entitled A Status Report. If you haven't watched the previous episodes, feel free to check out the links in the description below. Now, let's get to the video. Datta and Granville were seated facing each other, each sizing up their partner as they calmly chatted. Datta told Granville that he was quite a spiteful man, and he would have him know that he'd come very close to dying. Granville told Datta to stop being absurd, because Granville knew that Datta fled before he could even get involved. Datta said he had no choice and asked Granville if Datta's protege delivered the news to him. More or less, yes, said Granville. Datta said that Demon had been more of a monster than he ever imagined. The Empire's regular forces would hardly stand a chance. Datta added that to defeat him, they would need the most powerful army he knew, the Imperial Guard. In Datta's eyes, their plan had failed. Thus, he felt it prudent to keep his distance from the Rosa family until the heat died down a little. If their scheme had worked, that would have given them an advantage in the negotiations. But if not, he was likely to face demands he found singularly unreasonable. Right now, he simply wanted to cut his losses and move on. But things had changed. On his way to Tempest, he had received a magical call, reporting the news to him that Hinata was defeated and that she and the Demon Lord Rimuru had agreed to terms. Datta had pictured this happening, but it was still the worst possible outcome imaginable. Hinata's survival made it harder to do business in the nations where the Western Holy Church held sway. If Hinata had made peace with Rimuru, it was unlikely that anyone could rile that Demon Lord up once again to kill Hinata. Datta and Granville joined forces on this scheme because they both stood gain from it. But it was now safe to say the whole thing failed miserably. Although, depending on how you view this, you could call it fortuitous. Their strategy had failed, but to Datta, this was at best a glancing blow. It meant losing part of their foundation in the Western nations, but there were other trade routes. CERBERUS was a group as enormous as it was shadowy, operating several different trade organizations as fronts for its activities. Furthermore, Datta had no personal interest in whether Hinata lived or died. Granville's failure was therefore not all that irritating to him. And thanks to that, Datta was currently trying to work out his and Granville's future relationship to his advantage. After a hasty change of plans, Datta had come to meet with Granville once again. Datta asked Granville if he was all bark and no bite, because not only did he fail to take care of Hinata, her connection to Rimuru was even stronger than before. Datta was blind to his own involvement in their failed strategy, so he moved to criticize Granville instead. But Granville himself was likely expecting as much. Granville replied yes, and he must admit to that. There would be no rebalancing the scales now. Farmus, for all its history, had fallen, and Granville imagined that a new nation would replace it. It was exactly what Rimuru wanted, and it meant Datta's project was in shambles. Granville didn't hesitate to agree with Datta and went on to expound on his own theory before getting right to the point. Datta, well aware of the current situation, chose to respond with silence. Granville asked Datta what he would do and said that Rimuru seemed to want the Forest of Jura to become the financial center of the world, and they of the Rozos wouldn't stand for that. Datta coldly calculated how to respond. He had no intention of deliberately getting on the Rozos' wrong side. As far as he was concerned, if they could both just put this state of affairs behind them, all was well. And Granville, to his credit, seemed to be of the same mind, going ahead of Datta and turning his eyes toward the future. Granville concluded now that a fight between the Demon Lord and Saint Hinata was unlikely to happen. There's no point quarreling with each other, and any further public activity would be ill-advised. Granville stressed the same was true for Darmada's side as well. Granville seemed to be reading his mind. Darmada grinned at him and said that there was no outwitting him, calling Granville his good man. Darmada agreed there was no point trying to assign blame for this failure. The 5 elders had been more than kind to them up to now, and Darmada knew this remained the case. They might not have been able to profit off a potential war, but it was alright for Darmada to let it be so. As long as they remained alive, other opportunities would come. Granville told Darmada that it was well said, and that he did appreciate how quickly Darmada understood him. Granville proposed to continue to work together to block this new economic threat before it began. It went without saying that Darmada's mission was to protect his interests in the Western nations. Maribel, Granville's treasure, had predicted that this nation in the forests of Jura would potentially become a financial juggernaut. If it did, that would inevitably weaken the Rosso family's influence on the world. Granville would never allow cracks to open on the system of rule his ancestors spent thousands of years building up. That was why he wanted to interfere with Rimuru to crush his ambitions, but without his status as part of the 7 Days clergy, he could no longer use the name of the god Luminous to his advantage. Thus, no matter what it took, he needed support from Cerberus. The other 5 elders, Granville's descendants and comrades, supported him on that, applying pressure to the Council of the West and ensuring that the post-war cleanup over on Farmus took as long as possible. They couldn't stop that country from crowning a new king, but they could do whatever it took to delay the inevitable. The Rosso family still had a few aces up their sleeve, but it was too premature to use them. Better to take advantage of Cerberus instead, Granville thought, but Darmada wasn't ready to agree with him. The Rossos and the 5 elders they controlled were excellent business partners. Darmada truly had no intention of doing away with their relationship, but thinking that this meant Darmada was their lapdog would be a mistake. Darmada was a merchant, motivated by money, and he had a flexible mind. Cerberus had grown fabulously rich because of the exclusive control it held over trade between the East and West. Yes, but the arrival of a new customer to work with was nothing that hurt Cerberus. The 5 elders' loss of influence over the Western nations was no business of theirs. Darmada said that he truly did desire to maintain friendly relations with Granville and his family. However, Darmada was afraid he couldn't readily agree to Granville's suggestion. After all, their organization had no reason to be hostile to Rimuru. Granville couldn't believe Darmada would say that. Darmada grinned at him and said that, as Granville himself said, now that Hinata knew Darmada, any further activity in the Western nations was out of the picture. Instead, Darmada would return home and provide Granville with someone else. The message Darmada gave was clear. If Granville had eliminated Hinata, as promised, Darmada could be more active right now, but that hadn't happened. Granville was silent. Darmada advised Granville that for the time being, they would continue their transactions as before, and as for this incident, he suggested that they should just forgive and forget. Darmada stood up. Granville had misread him, and he could no longer force the point. The Cerberus group had an iron grip on the Eastern Empire's underground, angering Darmada, one of their bosses. Enough to sever the relations for good was too much of a loss for the Rossos to bear right now. Granville replied that they would handle it themselves then, and he did hope that Darmada would at least refrain from interfering in the matter. Darmada replied with a smile that much went without saying. Darmada advised Granville to look back at their previous dealings, and Granville would see that he was safe trusting them. With a polite bow, Darmada left the room. From start to finish, Darmada had been sincere in everything he said. On the surface, he was the very picture of an honest merchant. But if Hinata had been killed as planned, Darmada would have reached out to Rimuru long ago, pitting the Razos against the Demon Lord and profiting off the eventual clash. But an impartial observer never would have suspected any of that. People called him Darmada the Gold for a reason. But Granville was a sly old dog himself. He had mostly an accurate grip on Darmada's motivations. Yes, Darmada was unlikely to interfere, but he didn't say anything about not courting Rimuru. Darmada had told no lies, which was the minimum anyone would want to see from a merchant. But Granville was the leader of a family who ruled over much of the world's business. Darmada's attitude wasn't something Granville was willing to abide. Granville, now alone in the room, whispered that he detested him so much. If Darmada thought that he could take advantage of Granville, it was a big mistake. Once this matter was done with, Darmada was next. The humiliation in Granville's eyes darkened into surging rage. That's it for this video, guys. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and click the bell notification icon so you will never miss the upcoming continuation of Tensura spoiler video series. Thank you for always watching my videos and supporting my channel. Shout out to the top 10 commenters on my previous video. Shout out to Rivals Akilin, Peanut, Yuki-chan, Mazin Zold, Amaral Tempest, Gerald Ramirez, Kawan Shuan, Scratch Good 3, Hashira of Shish, Hamza RD3, SNBJ Gaming, Deep Patel, Sucker for Anime, Eric LH Mar, Riri Tokisaki, and last but not the least, shout out to Michael. I'll see you guys in the next video.